Afternoon, I'm Max Brantley with the Arkansas Times. It's Monday, September 8th. News today. Polls at the end of last week showed good news for Republicans, bad news for Democrats in two key races. NBC News released the polls Sunday, actually, and it showed that Tom Cotton has a 45-40 lead over Mark Pryor in the race for Senate, and Asa Hutchinson has a 48-39 lead over Mike Ross in the race for governor. I think what this means is number one, that negative ads work, dishonest ads work, and that we'll see more from both sides as the week goes on. This news is accompanied by news that one of Tom Cotton's most heavily played ads, talking about Mark Pryor's votes supposedly in favor of Social Security for illegal immigrants, is wrong, just as it was wrong 8 years ago when they first showed that it was wrong, but they're going to still keep running it. The other big news in politics was the near stampede, I guess you'd say, by Republican candidates who suddenly become newfound supporters of an increase in the minimum wage for Arkansas workers. Until late last week, there wasn't a Republican candidate on record in favor of the minimum wage increase that's going to be on the ballot November the 4th. Suddenly, they took turns from Asa Hutchinson to Tom Cotton to Tim Griffin to Rick Crawford saying, you bet they're going to vote for it. Tom Cotton said he was going to vote for it as a citizen, whatever that means. I thought he was a citizen 24 hours a day. In any event, I think Republicans saw a campaign issue that was helping the Democrats, and they moved to neutralize it, what they likely will do. At the same time, Republicans are still running against Obamacare, and there's numbers on that today. Now 205,000 Arkansans have qualified to sign up for coverage under the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, thanks to the Medicaid expansion Arkansas adopted. And there, I think another 40,000 or so will get coverage through the Health Insurance Exchange. Talking Points memo today has a story about how the GOP nightmare has come true. Obamacare is in fact working and providing tremendous benefits across the country. As I've said before, I don't think that necessarily means that Arkansas voters feel the same way about it. In other news today, the Buffalo River Coalition says it is not happy with Cargill's response, that it intends to stick with its hog farming operation in the Buffalo River Shed. It says what Cargill proposes is environmental protections are not adequate. The only solution up there is to have no hog farm in the watershed. There are a couple of issues today that aren't really local news, but they provide topics for discussion that have been very hot on our social media pages, and I urge you to take a look. One is the news that the owner of the Atlanta Hawks basketball team, Bruce Levinson, is going to sell his team because an email surfaced that he wrote a couple of years ago talking about how he had a hard time getting white people to go to pro basketball games in Atlanta because the crowd was overwhelmingly black. This has been described as a racist email. I think he describes a fact of life throughout the South, that when the numbers of black people get high enough in schools, churches, or wherever, there's a demonstrable resistance on the part of some white people to go there. It's a demographic thing. It's a thing you wish was not so, but it is so. I think he perhaps said it in a way that could have been said more carefully, but nonetheless, it's caused quite a stir. Similarly, today there was a video released of Ray Rice, a football player for the Baltimore Ravens, punching his wife in a hotel elevator. We already knew he'd roughed her up. New video shows it was even worse than previously suspected. He's lost his football contract. This reminded me on the blog of the times when men act up, where there are always people to rush to defend the men, as saying, well, boys will be boys. I would hope in a case of domestic violence that was not the case, but there's a lot that needs to be changed in the world. I noticed that the Arkansas Democrat Gazette over the weekend did a report on something Arkansas businesses reported on extensively over the years, and that's the lack of women on the boards of the corporations that govern the state's biggest publicly held corporations. Is that simply a product of merit, or is it simply a product of some view of women as second-class citizens? I tend to look at it as the more unflattering interpretation. In other news, the Fort Smith Sheriff's Office, or a deputy there, has settled and paid $40,000 to a man he stopped from filming a drug raid who was standing out on the street and using his iPhone. It's going to cost the county indemnity fund $90,000. The better news is the sheriff's office is now going to have a written policy that acknowledges, yes, there is a First Amendment right for people to record what they see happen in front of them in public, and deputies can't stop it just because they don't like it. Finally, there was a nice photo today of Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. The two former presidents were together for a happy occasion in Washington to announce a new scholarship program at presidential libraries. They'll train business, military, and and public affairs leaders and the kinds of things that presidents have to deal with in decision making to perhaps help them in their own decisions. There was a lot of joking, including about a potential presidential contest between Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush in 2016. George W. Bush noted that the last time a Bush ran against a Clinton, it didn't turn out too well. And indeed not. That would have been his father, of course. I'm Max Brantley. That's all for today. I'll be back tomorrow.